Good afternoon, everyone, or good evening, as the case may be, wherever you are. I want to start by thanking a big thank you to Mike Mobius for his provision and arrangement of these presentations, which, as we all know, have been so helpful to historians and scholars and writers, Civil War buffs, and so forth, in this very, very difficult time that we're going through. Thanks, Mike. Great job. I am John C. Fazio. I am coming to you from Fairlawn, Ohio, which is a suburb of Akron, which some of you may know. It's about 40 miles south of Cleveland. It is snowing today. Not a whole lot for this area, about 4 or 5 inches. I'm going to talk to you today about the Kearsarge, Alabama saga, which the title of this presentation is Intrepid Mariners. I give you the world, 70% water. Therefore, whoever controls the water controls the world. Is that true? Well, not anymore, it isn't. With the advent of air power in the 20th century, it is no longer true. But it was certainly true in the 19th century and in all centuries before that. The 19th century belonged to Great Britain, the 20th to America. The 21st, the jury is still out. In the 19th century and even into the 20th, the sun never set on the British Empire because of sea power. At some point in British history, probably around the year 400 AD, when the Romans left, a very wise man, or perhaps a wise woman, made a very important decision. And it was that if that island nation in the northwestern corner of Europe was going to survive, it would be by sea power. It would need a cordon of ships to keep would-be conquerors away. And so they built a navy. And when they did, they found that it not only guaranteed their survival, though there were successful invasions of England, most notably the Angles and Saxons, the Vikings and the Normans in 1066 and all that. But generally speaking, they found that it not only guaranteed their survival, but it also enabled them to cast a very long shadow over the entire world and to project their power and influence to the ends of the earth, and thereby to exploit the natural resources of other countries, and thereby to make themselves quite rich, which is why they were here in the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries, and why a vestige of their former glory survives to this day in our northern neighbor. By the middle of the 19th century, the greatest sea power on earth, Great Britain, watched helplessly as its dominance of maritime commerce was eclipsed by the United States of America, that upstart child that a mere 7 decades earlier had broken from its mother country, and which now, in the middle of the 19th century, was already one of the 4 most powerful nations on earth, the other 3 being Great Britain, France, and Russia. American ships now plied the 7 seas, picking up and delivering cargoes everywhere. Commerce, of course, meant money. Money then, as now, meant power. And power, if you didn't know, is what it's all about. Bismarck said, "There is no altruism among nations." When the American Union came apart in 1860, Britain, of course, was pleased. Well, why pleased? And why, of course? Because a major rival, well on its way to becoming the most dominant maritime power on earth, was thereby weakened and its progress interrupted. But Britain had to be very careful. If she backed the wrong horse, which is to say, if she supported the South, with which her ruling class was completely sympathetic, the London Times, the official mouthpiece of the ruling class, was solidly pro-South, and the North won, then she risked the eternal enmity of a growing nation whose friendship was deemed at least desirable, if not absolutely necessary to her survival. Her intelligence services told her that a Confederate victory was unlikely. The problem then for Great Britain was how to help the Confederacy destroy American, which is to say Northern commerce, thereby assuring the restoration of her own dominance in trade without so alienating the North as to lose the friendship and therefore the protection of a reunited United States. Could she have both? She could, and she would. For the relatively paltry sum of $15.5 million, Great Britain very deftly accomplished both goals by, first of all, refusing to formally recognize the Confederacy and refusing to intervene directly in our conflict, while at the same time, that is between 1861 and 1864, turning a blind eye to the sale of arms to the Confederacy by private manufacturers, and more importantly, turning a blind eye to the construction in her ports of raiders, commerce raiders, which she knew would be used to destroy Northern merchantmen on the high seas, which brings me to my principal subject. During the Civil War, the Confederacy put to sea 8 warships and 4 merchantmen, which she converted to warships, Union merchantmen, for the purpose of destroying American, which is to say Northern commerce. They were the CSS, that's Confederate States ship, the CSS Sumter, Nashville, Florida, Tallahassee, renamed the Lusty, Chickamauga, Georgia, Alabama, and Shenandoah. The 4 converts were the Clarence, the Tacony or the Tacony, the Archer, the Conrad, renamed the Tuscaloosa, all storied names in Confederate lore. Of these, all but 2, the Sumter and the Nashville, were built in British yards. Without British complicity, those raiders simply would not have been built because the Confederacy had neither the materials nor the facilities to build them. Let there be no mistake, this was not something beyond the control of Her Majesty's government. That government knew full well that those raiders were being built and knew full well their destination and purpose. That government simply looked the other way. And when Charles Francis Adams, that man, the American minister to the Court of St. James, which is to say, the American ambassador to Great Britain, complained, that government simply looked the other way. He complained to that man, the England's foreign minister, Lord John Russell. That government, as I said, looked the other way, obfuscated, dissembled, and walked a fine line I spoke of earlier between facilitating the destruction of American shipping, which it wanted very badly, and maintaining the friendship of the United States, which it also wanted very badly, because our intelligence services concluded that the North would likely win the war and that Britain's ultimate salvation would be guaranteed by American friendship, a policy vindicated in World War I and again in World War II, and which Great Britain, follows to this day. Those 8 warships and 4 converts inflicted incredible damage on the United States as a maritime power. More specifically, they burned, bonded, scuttled, or sank 226 Union merchantmen, vessels of every conceivable kind, brigs, barks, schooners, clippers, a revenue cutter, pilot boats, plus a warship, the USS Hatteras. How damaging was that? Well, consider that it took until 1945, 80 years, before the United States regained its position as the world's dominant maritime power. Now, how, you may ask, could 12 ships, no more than 2 of which were at sea at any given time, cause so much damage? Well, when you think about it, it's not that hard, except in the case of the converts, they were heavily armed and their prey were either unarmed or lightly armed. A captain of a merchantman on the high seas does not fancy certain death for himself and for his crew or for any passengers he might have aboard. One look at the armament of those raiders was enough to convince him of the wisdom of surrender. 2 of the converts, the Clarence and the Tacony, had only 1 bona fide cannon each, and that a small one, but they had rows of Quaker guns. These were sculpted wood, made to look like cannons, painted black and visible through gun ports. They were just as effective as the real thing, because from a distance, they looked just like the real thing. Now, to give you some idea of what it looks like to capture and burn a ship on the high seas, I have a couple of illustrations. There is Lieutenant Reed, the Confederate, obviously, burning the Caleb Cushing off Portland, Maine. And here is the Florida. That's one of the raiders, the Florida, burning the clipper ship Jacob Bell on December 13th, 1863. Only another armed vessel could destroy a raider, and the US Navy had a lot of them. Most of them were used to blockade southern ports. Some, however, did sail all over the world looking for these raiders, but the world is big, 70% water, as I said earlier. So a US warship might search for months and even years before finding a raider and being given an opportunity to capture or destroy her. The most successful Confederate raider was the CSS Alabama, named for her commander, our first intrepid mariner, Raphael Semmes. Old Beeswax, as he was called because of his handlebar mustache. She was pursued by the USS Kearsarge, named for a mountain in New Hampshire, which was under the command of John A. for Ancram Winslow, and he is our second intrepid mariner. The story of the Kearsarge in the Alabama is a story filled with ironies. It is not only history, it is supreme literature. The first irony is that Semmes, who fought for the South, was actually a Northerner born in Maryland, a state that never seceded from the Union. The second irony is that Winslow, who fought for the North, was actually a Southerner born in North Carolina. For the third irony, we have to go back to the years 1846 and 1847 and President John Knox Polk's nasty little war against our Southern neighbor. Asked why he made war against Mexico, Polk said, we had to have California. Well, he got California, and we got the worst civil war in the history of the human race. The Mexican War, according to U.S. Grant in his memoirs, was, quote, one of the most unjust wars ever waged by a stronger against a weaker nation. It was an instance of a republic following the bad example of European monarchies in not considering justice in their desire to acquire additional territory, unquote. On another occasion, Grant said, quote, all our troubles, that is, the American Civil War, began with Mexico, unquote. And on still another occasion, he wrote, the Southern Rebellion was largely the outgrowth of the Mexican War. Nations, like individuals, are punished for their transgressions. Anyway, during the Mexican War, two American sailors served together aboard the USS Cumberland. They were roommates, they were messmates, and they shared a wardrobe. One was Raphael Semmes, age 37, and the other was John Winslow, age 35. But the ironies don't stop there. Both were given commands of ships, and both commands ended in disaster. And both of the men found themselves swimming for their lives in Mexican waters. Semmes' ship, the Somers, capsized in a storm. Winslow's, the Morris, got stuck on a reef. So much for commands. Later, both men served aboard a very big ship, the USS Raritan, a 1,726-ton frigate, during the siege of Veracruz in March of 1847. They were roommates and messmates there too, and also shared a wardrobe. As one might expect, fighting on the same side and having so much in common, they became the very best of friends, and they did everything together. They went everywhere together. They took their grog together. They smoked together. They wrote and read letters together. They also joked a lot about the common misfortunes of their commands. Here's an actual exchange of good-natured one-upmanship. Winslow, Semmes, they're going to take you out to learn to take care of ships in blockade. Semmes, Winslow, they're going to send you out to learn the bearing of reefs. A hearty laugh. Naturally, they developed a great affection for each other, as comrades in arms often do. After a period, Winslow had to go home because of health reasons. It was said officially that he was, quote, unfit for further duty in the tropics, unquote. When it came time for him to leave, they embraced, they bade each other a fond farewell, and expressed the hope that they would see each other again, and that they would communicate with each other, which they did, not as much as they imagined they would, but enough for Winslow to write to Semmes, pleading with him to remain loyal to the Union when the secession of Alabama was imminent. Though it was a difficult decision for him, Semmes said that he was going to stay with his state. That was his decision, a decision that greatly grieved Winslow. But the greatest irony was yet to come. It would be played out, or more accurately, fought out, off the coast of Cherbourg, France, where and when these erstwhile countrymen and best friends would go for each other's jugular. But a lot would happen between Veracruz and Cherbourg. After Alabama seceded from the Union, Sams, on orders from Jefferson Davis himself, went north for the purpose of enlisting support for the Southern cause. And also, while he was there, to purchase munitions. He did very well, apparently because Northern arms merchants were more interested in profit than principle, more interested in lucre than loyalty. When has it ever been otherwise? Upon his return to Montgomery on April 4th, 1861, he was commissioned a commander in the fledgling Confederate States Navy, an arm of the Confederacy that was short on ships, but long on talent. Having had experience with lighthouse duty when he was with the United States Navy, he was placed in charge of that bureau by the Confederate States Navy. But he soon realized that the Confederacy had another need, a greater need, and one for which he was better suited, namely commerce raiding. On orders from Stephen Mallory, that man, who the Confederate Secretary of the Navy, who liked what he heard from Sams, he sent Sams to New Orleans to convert a steamer there to a cruiser, which was christened the CSS Sumter. And she is our first Confederate commerce raider. And there is the Sumter, an illustration of her, 1862. And there is still another very handsome ship, I think we would all agree. And here is a photo of Sams with his officers aboard the Sumter. That, of course, is Sams in the middle, looking like a peacock, very, very obviously proud of himself and what he was doing. In June of 1861, Sumter ran the federal blockade, which Lincoln had ordered into effect on April 19th, 1861, from South Carolina to the Rio Grande. And on April 29th, 1861, to include Virginia and North Carolina, all in accordance with Winfield Scott's Anaconda Plan, which, as we all know, worked. He spent the next 6 months in the Gulf, the West Indies, and the Atlantic, looking for and finding U.S. merchant ships. He captured 18. Captured usually meant he burned them to the waterline after removing whatever he thought he could make use of and paroling his prisoners, which sometimes included passengers. In January of 1862, he brought his raider to Gibraltar for repairs and coal. 2 Union cruisers, learning of his presence there, blockaded him. Another irony, one of those cruisers was the Kearsarge, but she was not under the command of Winslow at the time. 5 other cruisers soon joined the blockade, and Sams realized that there was no way he was going to save Sumter, so he abandoned her to a skeleton crew and made his way overland with his officers to England, where he knew a magnificent new cruiser was being built for him. She was state-of-the-art, sleek and fast, identified for security reasons only as hull number 290. She was built in Liverpool, ostensibly for French purchasers, but her ultimate destination was known to everyone. The docks and yards in Liverpool were crawling with Union agents. Her construction, therefore, caused a diplomatic flap between the United States and Great Britain. In order to circumvent American objections, therefore, the builders did not arm her. They could thus argue, and they did argue, that neutrality laws, Britain's neutrality laws, which prohibited the construction of warships for belligerent nations in her ports, had been complied with. On July 29, 1862, she steamed out of Liverpool on a, quote, trial run, complete with a civilian contingent to give it the appearance of a holiday excursion. At some point that was convenient to those in command, but not particularly convenient to the passengers, the latter were put ashore, and the ship continued on its way until she reached the Azores. There she was armed and christened the Alabama, CSS Alabama, in honor of her commander's home state. And here is a shot, an illustration of the Alabama. And here is another one. Note steam and sail power, which characterized ocean-going vessels at that time. And here is still another one of the Alabama, which I think we would all agree is a very handsome ship. Semmes, there he is, aboard the Alabama, Cal in the background. Semmes, now promoted to the rank of captain and ably assisted by his first lieutenant, John McIntosh Cal. That's the fellow in the background here. And here's another of him close up. Took command of Alabama and began a maritime saga that surpassed anything in the annals of the United States Navy and perhaps of any Navy in the history of the world. He took Alabama into the Caribbean, into the Gulf first, and then into the Caribbean, and then into the South Atlantic, around the Cape of Good Hope, and into the Indian Ocean, and all the way to the South China Sea. And then back again, South China Sea, Indian Ocean. This time he went between the islands of Madagascar and the African mainland, around the Cape of Good Hope, into the South Atlantic, into the North Atlantic, to France. En route, this incidentally occurred from August of 62 to June of 64. En route, and incredibly, he sank a US warship, the USS Hatteras, and there she is taking the Hatteras off Galveston. And he also captured 68 Union merchantmen, count them, 68 Union merchantmen, to add to those he had captured when he captained Sumter, most of which he burned to the waterline, some of which, however, he bonded and scuttled. Semmes quite simply became a terror to Federal shipping, swooping in on his prey with lightning speed, bagging her and then skillfully eluding all pursuers from one end of the globe to the other. To Confederates, he was a hero, a welcome tonic for bad news in the land war. To Federals, he was nothing more than a pirate who would one day receive his comeuppance for inflicting $6 million of damage through their cause, an astronomical sum in those days, plus another $7 million to pursue her, driving insurance rates through the roof, effectively wrecking Union shipping for 2 years, and inflicting a wound to American commerce from which it took almost a century to recover. Though Federal seamen could not help but admire his skill and daring, except for Secretary of the Navy Gideon Welles. To Welles, he was nothing more than a pirate who would one day be captured or killed. He referred to him as that wolf from Liverpool, and he put the death highest on his wish list, and that is Welles. On June 10th, 1864, with his ship badly in need of repairs, Semmes anchored off Cherbourg Harbor. He requested permission from French authorities to put her in dry dock, but the Emperor Napoleon III was not available. He was off in Biarritz vacationing. Semmes, confident of the Emperor's sympathy, decided to wait. It was a fateful and fatal pause. The lives of the two intrepid mariners, countrymen who had fought under the same flag, who had been roommates and messmates and shared the same wardrobe on 2 warships in the Mexican War, who had become best of friends, who had almost died together at the same time, in the same waters, in the same war, 17 years earlier, were about to intersect again. While Raphael Semmes was making his way to Cherbourg by way of Montgomery and Richmond, Winslow was also making his way there, but by a different route. In 1855, he was promoted to the rank of commander. More irony, Semmes was promoted to the same rank in the same year. In 1861, with the war on, he was assigned to duty on the Mississippi as executive officer of the Western Gunboat Flotilla, the so-called Brownwater Navy. In July of 1862, he was promoted to the rank of captain. In April of 1863, Welles summoned him to Washington. They met in Welles's office, and the conversation went more or less as follows. Welles, Captain Winslow, I am putting you in command of Kearsarge. You know the ship, I'm sure. Winslow, I do, sir. and thank you for the great honor. Wells, she's a wet ship, but she's armed to the teeth, as well or better than anything in the service. Winslow, I am also familiar with her armament, sir. Wells, Thornton will be at your side. He's a good man, a capable man. Winslow, I could not ask for a better one. Wells, it will come as no surprise to you that your assignment will be to seek, find, and destroy enemy commerce raiders, which, as you know, have wreaked havoc with our merchantmen. I would like you to concentrate particularly on the Alabama, which has done more damage to our cause, cost us more in money than all of the others combined, easily. She has captured scores of our merchantmen, burned most of them, driven their insurance rates through the roof, and all but cleared the seas of our commerce. She has cost us millions in lost ships and cargo, and more millions to pursue her. She also sank the Hatteras. Now, by God, John, if Alabama can find us, then we can find Alabama. Am I making myself clear? You are, sir. She's under the command of a wolf from Liverpool, a traitor, a disgrace to the service and to himself. He is Raphael Semmes. Do you know him by any chance? Winslow swallowed hard. I do, sir. How do you know him? We served together, sir, aboard Cumberland and Raritan in Mexico. Ah, yes, Cumberland and Raritan. I recall it now. It is in the record. Did you know him well? Quite. Were you close? Quite. How close? We were roommates, messmates, shared the same wardrobe. I see. Well, if you feel that your closeness to Captain Semmes will preclude, and that's as far as he got, because Winslow interrupted him almost rudely and said, it will preclude nothing. I know my loyalties. I know my responsibilities. Wells, very well then. You have your assignment. Here are your written orders. She is in Fayal, being refitted. She'll be ready for you by the time you reach her. Thank you, sir. Oh, and John, sir, Godspeed. In April 1863, Winslow took command of Kearsarge at Fayal in the Azores and spent the next year and 2 months looking for Confederate raiders, especially one Confederate raider, Alabama. Never knowing when or where he might encounter a raider, he kept his ship, his officers, and his men, his crew, ready for every eventuality, a bit of foresight that would serve him well, as we shall see. And there is a detail of Kearsarge. Here's a better one. Another beautiful ship. And here's a still better one. That's Kearsarge. Winslow was ably served by his second in command, Commander James S. Thornton. That man. On June 12th, 1864, Kearsarge was anchored in the Scheldt. The Scheldt off Flushing, Holland. The Scheldt is a river that flows through northern France, western Belgium, southwestern Netherlands, and into the North Sea. William L. Dayton, that man, the American minister to France, sent Winslow a telegram advising him that Alabama was in Cherbourg Harbor and that her presence there had been reported in all the newspapers. Winslow couldn't believe his good fortune. He immediately called all his men to the ship and sailed immediately for Dover for dispatches. The next day he crossed the channel and was off Cherbourg on June 14th with a ship and a crew in top condition. Upon his arrival, he and his men could see the Confederate flag flying brazenly beyond the breakwater. At this distance in time and place, it is impossible for us to imagine the thrill, the utter elation that they must have felt at having finally cornered the daring rover, as they called her, the daring rover, which had all but destroyed Union commerce for almost 2 years and had left in her wake a trail of befuddled pursuers. 25 Union warships had pursued her at a cost of $7 million. Watching her through his scope and knowing that she was under the command of his former comrade in arms and best friend, Winslow knew that the event of his life was upon him, an event from which he must emerge as either a hero or a corpse. In his book, The Life of John A. Winslow, John Morris Ellicott had this to say about this moment. What were the feelings of the two commanders, Semmes and Winslow, shipmates, messmates, and roommates in a previous war, in which each had won commendation for brave deeds? In that war, they had fought side by side with all the ardor of youth. Now, in the maturity of years and experience, they had come together again, grim, if not bitter opponents in a far more stupendous conflict, duelists, as equally equipped as such can ever be in naval warfare. Each was familiar with the other's characteristics. Semmes knew that he would be blockaded with ceaseless vigilance. Winslow felt sure that his opponent would ultimately fight his way out rather than be smothered in a hole. There were two entrances to Cherbourg Harbor, east and west. Winslow ordered both of them watched to assure that the pirate, that's how they referred to Alabama as a pirate, that the pirate would not escape. And then he positioned Kearsarge a few miles offshore, a silent sentinel, cat-like. And then he waited and waited. He had waited 1 year and 2 months for this opportunity. He would not let it slip through his fingers. Both ships were magnificent specimens of naval architecture, about 1,000 tons each. Kearsarge 1031, Alabama 1150. But Kearsarge had more firepower, and her powder was fresher, a fact that would figure in the outcome of the battle, as we shall soon see. Because of her edge in firepower, and also because of the condition of his ship and crew, Winslow was confident that he could take Alabama in a fair fight. When he learned of the presence of Kearsarge, Semmes, never one to shrink from a fight, challenged her. He sent word to Winslow through Confederate commercial agent A. Bonfils, that's Bonfils, to inform Winslow through the United States commercial agent, a Mr. Elias, that if Winslow would wait until he had taken on sufficient coal, he would give battle. Winslow responded through the same channels that he was there to fight, and that he had no intention of leaving. No reference was made to their former friendship. It was all business now. Semmes, knowing he had no time to spare because other federal ships would soon make escape impossible, spent the next 4 days preparing for battle. In the process, his crew, who were mostly English, amused themselves and bolstered their courage with this ditty. We're homeward bound, and soon we'll be on English ground. But ere that English ground we see, we first must fight the Kearsarge. The stage was now set for the lives of the two intrepid mariners to intersect again. Sunday, June 19th, 1864, dawned beautifully. Warm, a touch of haze, a slight westerly wind blowing across the waves, which caused the sails to pillow and the ensigns to snap and flap in a way that always stirs men's blood. A puff of cloud here and there to break the pale blue sky and the fading embers in the east. And as far as the eye could see, the dark and mysterious waters. It was a day to celebrate life. Instead, before it was half over, the decks of the ships would be strewn with the mangled bodies of brave men, and with the remains of other brave men staring vacantly at infinity. And the ocean floor, 45 fathoms below, would be dotted with the lifeless forms of still other brave men, their lungs filled with seawater. But the die was cast. On one thing, Winslow and Semmes would surely agree. Death and disfigurement were unspeakably ugly, but nothing was uglier than cowardice, dishonor, disgrace. Semmes is reported to have said that he would, quote, prove to the world that his ship was not a privateer intended only for attack upon merchant vessels, but a true man of war. And so at 9:45 a.m., Alabama, with 154 men, raised anchor and headed for Kearsarge, which had 163 men aboard. She was escorted by the French ironclad Couronne and some smaller craft, one of which may have had the French Impressionist master Edouard Manet aboard, because Manet would later put the battle on canvas. She was also escorted by an English yacht, Deerhound. It was owned by a British textile magnate, one John Lancaster, who happened to be vacationing with his family and their nurse in France. They had earlier taken a vote as to what they would do with their Sunday morning, either watch a sea battle or go to church. The vote came down even until it came to 9-year-old Catherine Lancaster. She was the only one who hadn't voted yet, and she voted to watch a sea battle. Semmes and 41 of his officers and men would soon owe their lives to that 9-year-old girl. More irony. It wasn't Semmes's vaunted cunning and daring that would save them. It wasn't his officers and his crew's undoubted bravery that would save them. It wasn't their graceful lady and her array of death-dealing armaments that would save them, but the vote of a 9-year-old girl saved them. Deerhound stayed close to the action and will play a pivotal role in the aftermath, as we shall see. Because of the publicity of the impending duel, 15,000 Frenchmen gathered on shore, on the cliffs, on the break wall, and in ships, some of which flew the Confederate flag. A band aboard a French ship played Dixie. And there is the gathering of some 15,000 Frenchmen watching the battle. During the 45 minutes it took for Alabama to reach Kearsarge, Semmes addressed his men as follows. Officers and seamen of the Alabama, you have at length another opportunity of meeting the enemy, the first that has been presented to you since you sank the Hatteras. In the meantime, you have been all over the world, and it is not too much to say that you have destroyed and driven for protection under neutral flags one half of the enemy's commerce, which at the beginning of the war covered every sea. This is an achievement of which you may well be proud, and a grateful country will not be unmindful of it. The name of your ship has become a household word wherever civilization extends. Shall that name be tarnished by defeat? The thing is impossible. Remember that you are in the English Channel, the theater of so much of the naval glory of our race, and that the eyes of all Europe are at this moment upon you. The flag that floats over you is that of a young republic who bids defiance to her enemies, whenever and wherever found. Show the world that you know how to uphold it. Go to your quarters. As we did every Sunday, Winslow was conducting a prayer service at the same moment that Semmes was addressing his men. Suddenly, at 10:30, a lookout aboard Kearsarge cried, "She's coming!" and headed straight for us. Alabama! Alabama! The long wait was over. Winslow put down his prayer book, ordered the drum beat to general quarters, and the ship cleared for action. Believing that God helps those who help themselves, he now resolved to keep his end of the bargain. Winslow knew that the supreme moment of his life was at hand. To assure that French neutrality would not be violated and that the pirate would not escape, he took his vessel a little farther out to sea. When he was about 7 miles from shore and the ships were about a mile apart, at 10:57 a.m., the serenity of the scene, which might have flowed from the brush of an Impressionist master, and did in fact flow from the brush of an Impressionist master, Edouard Manet, was rudely shattered by the roar of a broadside of solid shot from Alabama's starboard. Boom, 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 boom. The sound of the booms carried across the harbor and on to the 15,000 spectators. And then silence. Winslow did not respond at first, apparently intending to fight at closer quarters. The loudest sound was the distant and muffled roar of the surf crashing upon the shore, and the sound of the sea lapping gently at the sides of the ships, which now stared and glared at each other like a couple of panthers, dark and beautiful, but deadly. 2 minutes passed. What was Winslow thinking? Then suddenly, a second and part of a third broadside thundered from Alabama's starboard. Boom, 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 boom. It was as if Semmes were saying, "John, my friend, didn't you hear me?" Now Winslow had had enough. He wheeled, close to within a half mile, brought Kearsarge about, presented his own starboard to the foe, and unleashed his own fury, a salvo of solid shot and shell, slicing through the crisp mid-morning air, some of which found the mark. Boom, 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 boom. It was as if Winslow were saying, "Raphael, my friend, I have heard you." The action now became hot and general, and the din fearful. A melange of booming, whistling, whooshing, crashing, and exploding, iron and powder with timbers splittering, sails tearing, and rigging collapsing. And through it all, the deep-throated cheers and screams and groans of the combatants, all of which combined to form a hideous incongruity with the natural beauty of the setting and the promise of the oncoming day. And there is an illustration of the battle. There's Kearsarge on the left. And here's another. That's Kearsarge on the left, Alabama in the forefront. And still another. This is the painting by Manet. It is in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, the original. Some of Alabama's initial fire cut Kearsarge rigging, but most shots went over and alongside Kearsarge. Alabama continued a rapid but wild fire. Her gunners were not as well trained as those of Kearsarge, nor in particularly good condition after being so long at sea. Though as the battle wore on, they did find the range. In the meantime, Kearsarge gunners, well rested, highly trained, in order to fire below the waterline with their heavy guns and clear the decks with their lighter ones, took a fearful toll on Alabama, killing and maiming men, disabling guns, causing rigging to collapse, and tearing gaping holes in her starboard hull and between decks. One shell exploded in a coal bunker, causing a dense cloud of coal dust to envelop Alabama. Kearsarge fired fewer projectiles, but most found the mark. The ship's surgeon recorded 173, Alabama twice that number, but other accounts give different figures. Contrariwise, of all the shot and shell fired by Alabama, only a few struck Kearsarge, damaging little more than masts and rigging. To make matters worse for Alabama, many of her shells were duds because of the dampness of the powder. Semmes could see early on that the battle was not going his way. He hoped, he prayed for a lucky shot that might yet save the day for him, his men, and their beloved lady. 15 minutes into the battle, he got it. He watched as a 100-pound shell from his Blakely rifle arched and then struck Kearsarge at its most vulnerable spot, the unprotected stern post. He couldn't believe his good fortune. He waited for a few seconds, keenly anticipating the explosion that he knew would put his nemesis away. He waited. He waited. He waited in vain because it never exploded. It was another dud. This stern post, incidentally, with the shell still embedded in it, still exists. It may be seen at the Naval Memorial Museum, Building 76, Washington Navy Yard, Washington, D.C. And there it is. Before the battle, Kell had warned Semmes about the condition of the powder, but Semmes didn't do anything because there wasn't anything he could do. except refused to fight, and he wasn't about to do that. As matters turned out, it was the condition of the powder that sank Alabama, because if the 100-pound shell that struck Kearsarge's stern post had exploded, it almost certainly would have sent Kearsarge to the bottom. Semmes later had this to say, quote, "If the cap had performed its duty and exploded the shell, I should have been called upon to save Captain Winslow's crew from drowning, instead of his being called upon to save mine. On so slight an incident, the defect of a percussion cap, did the battle hinge," unquote. More irony. It wasn't Winslow and his superb seamanship that won the battle. It wasn't his undoubted bravery and the undoubted bravery of his officers and men. It wasn't their magnificent ship nor the 11-inch Doggerins that won the battle. It was the condition of Alabama's powder and the consequent failure to explode a percussion cap that won the battle. Semmes noticed too that his solid shot appeared to do little damage to Kearsarge's hull. Only later did he find out that it was protected by a layer of sheet chain armor, which gave rise to claims of an unfair fight between an ironclad and a wooden ship. But Kearsarge's men responded by saying they didn't know how Semmes could be ignorant of the sheet chain armor. They had made no attempt to conceal it. Furthermore, it was known that Confederate spies had come aboard and been shown the ship. And furthermore, the same French pilot had been employed by both commanders and visited both ships during preparations. The idea of protecting a ship's midsection with sheet chain armor was well known. Farragut used it when he passed the forts at New Orleans. To his dying day, Semmes would claim that he knew nothing about the sheet chain armor and that he would not have engaged Kearsarge had he known of it. This is almost certainly untrue, a fabrication to make his loss more excusable, because one of his lieutenants, Arthur Sinclair by name, wrote a book called 2 Years on the Alabama, published in 1895. And here it is. I have a copy of it, and I'm going to read from it a relevant portion. He said, "I have often been asked why Semmes should decide to fight in his disabled condition, a ship so much his superior as to number of crew, armament, and speed, with the full knowledge also that the midship section of the Kearsarge was protected by bights of chain cables hung over her sides." And then he goes on to say that, however, the port admiral manifested a fellow feeling and interest in the lone expatriated exponent of the Confederacy by informing Semmes a day or so before the fight that an officer detailed to visit the Kearsarge in the offing had reported the fact of the chain armor arranged on the ship and strongly advised Semmes not to engage her, for that nothing but unlooked for good luck could throw the scales our way. We see therefore that Semmes ignored the warning. He ignored the warning because he knew that all preparations had been made for the battle, that news of the impending battle was all over Europe, that if he didn't fight, he would be called a coward. Other writers who are privy to the facts said that Semmes knew all about the sheet chain armor, that he had discussed it, in fact, with his officers a day or so before the battle, and that his post-battle denial is nothing less than, quote, shameless. Semmes is saying that he wouldn't have fought, therefore, cannot be credited. Furthermore, French naval officers had told him that honor required that he fight. He therefore had no choice, really. And still further, Semmes knew that other Union cruisers would soon make escape impossible, giving him no alternative but to fight. In any case, the two ships steamed through 7 full circles, doing their best to destroy each other with starboard broadsides of shot and shell. The superiority of Kearsarge's armament, the elan of her crew, and the sheet chain armor that protected her hull soon spelled doom for Alabama. After 1 hour and 10 minutes of ferocious combat at distances as close as 400 to 500 yards. Semmes tried to get her to shore, but it was too late. The sea was pouring in. The fact that her bunkers were full of 350 tons of coal did not help. To its credit, Winslow kept his ship underloaded of coal by 70 tons. Semmes knew now that he had no choice but to strike his colors. He did so, raising the white flag in its place. At this point, accounts differ as to what happened. According to Semmes, after he struck his colors and raised the white flag, Winslow poured another round into his stricken vessel in violation of the rules of Christian warfare, quote unquote, whatever that means. If true, it will forever tarnish Winslow's victory unless excused by ignorance. But Kearsarge's men told it differently. They said that when Semmes struck, Winslow ordered all firing to cease despite the fact that the white flag had not been shown. Whereupon 2 junior officers aboard Alabama, vowing that they would never surrender, opened fire on Kearsarge with 2 port guns, which prompted Winslow to order a final broadside into Alabama. It was only then that the white flag was shown over the stern and the ensign half-masted, causing Winslow to order for a second time a cessation of hostilities. In any case, Alabama settling by the stern, we can see her there, settling by the stern. This is the Dahlgren, incidentally, 11 inches. And that, incidentally, is Winslow there in the left, extreme left. She slipped beneath the waves to her final resting place at 12:24 p.m. after an hour and 27 minutes of combat, after firing the first shot in the only major battle between ocean-going vessels in the war. No one cheered. There was only silence as the graceful lady who had wreaked havoc on federal shipping for almost 2 years disappeared forever. And there she is, sinking by the stern, as you can see, with Kearsarge triumphantly standing by. Here's another detail of her sinking. And here's still another where she's all but gone. And many of her officers and crew are trying to make her escape with the lifeboats. Winslow ordered that his crew to save as many of the enemy as possible. But he only had 2 undamaged boats. Alabama had 2, but 1 was damaged, and there was therefore no way that everyone was going to be saved. A boat from Alabama pulled alongside Kearsarge with a few of the wounded. The officer in charge, a master's mate, after assuring Winslow that Semmes was dead, asked Winslow's permission to return to his drowning mates, giving his word of honor that he would then return to Kearsarge and surrender. Winslow permitted it, but the master's mate did not keep his word. Instead, he rescued a few officers and then took them and himself to Deerhound, leaving a number of men in the water. Deerhound had previously pulled alongside Kearsarge. Winslow had then shouted to her commander, John Lancaster, "For God's sake," he said, "do what you can to save them," which Lancaster did, pulling dozens of men, including Semmes and 12 of his officers aboard. A boat from Kearsarge passed along Deerhound. An officer asked, "Have you seen Semmes?" Kell answered. He said, "Semmes is drowned." It was not true. It was a lie. He hadn't drowned at all. He was lying between the stern sheets in the rear of the vessel, much bloodied, with 1 arm in a sling from a shrapnel wound, and only half alive. When a perfidious master's mate had deposited his human cargo aboard the Deerhound and set his boat adrift, Lancaster made sail for Southampton. Observing this, Winslow ordered a port gun to be prepared for firing across her bow so that she would heave to. The commands were heard. His commands, Winslow's, were heard by a sailor aboard Deerhound. The voice was familiar to him. Somehow he threw off the stern sheets that had been concealing him. Somehow he managed to get to his feet and across the deck. And with his one good arm, he grabbed hold of the railing, looking up at Kearsarge, squarely into the face of her commander, who at that moment was looking down at Deerhound, resplendent in his magnificent uniform, compared to the miserable specimen of humanity which now stood before him, bloodied from head to foot, and with 1 arm in a sling. No word was spoken between them. None needed to be. Recognition was instantaneous. They just stared at each other. A subordinate came up to Winslow and said, "A port gun is ready for firing, sir." Winslow did not respond. He just kept staring. Subordinate assumed that Winslow hadn't heard him, so he repeated himself. "A port gun is ready for firing, sir," he said across her bow. "Pursuant to your order." Winslow again did not respond at first. And then he turned to his subordinate and he said, with great sadness, he said, "Stand down." The subordinate was flabbergasted. "Stand down," he said. "What are you talking about? The enemy is there, and he is escaping right under our very noses." Winslow said, "The order is to stand down, Lieutenant." But that didn't put the lieutenant off. He came right back and said, "But why? Why have we fought this battle if we are going to allow the enemy to escape?" Now, Winslow, of course, was under no obligation to give the obstreperous lieutenant a reply, but he was supremely cognizant of the morale of his men, some of which were within earshot. And so he thought it prudent to give him a response. And he reached for one and finally hit on one that he thought was pretty good. He said, because I'm not in the business of firing on innocent civilians." And even that didn't put the obstreperous lieutenant off. He came back with, "But you will not be firing on innocent civilians. We will merely fire across her bow. She will surely heave to." Well, by this time, of course, Winslow was running out of patience. So he turned on the lieutenant and he said, "You have your orders, Lieutenant." And the lieutenant said, "Yes, Captain Winslow, I have my orders. And you may be sure that Secretary Wells will have them too." Well, now Winslow, of course, lost it completely. He turned on him and he said, "You insolent puppy, you dare to threaten me. Take him below." No harm would come to the obstreperous lieutenant, because in his heart, Winslow knew that the lieutenant was right. In any case, he watched Deerhound as she made her way slowly, toward the horizon, and Southampton growing smaller and smaller and smaller. And as he watched, he knew he would never, ever see his friend again. And he never did. But he took some comfort knowing that the last act of grace between them was his. In any case, Deerhound rescued 42 men, including 12 officers and including Semmes, who would make his way back to Richmond. Casualties were 26 killed, 19 drowned, and 21 wounded aboard Alabama. 70 were made prisoners, the others escaped. Kearsarge suffered only 3 wounded, one of whom died of his wounds. Thus ended one of the most significant engagements in American naval history. It is worth noting that Charles Francis Adams demanded the censure of Lancaster, but Sir John Russell, the foreign minister, said that Lancaster had behaved honorably and humanely. There would be no censure and there would be no return of prisoners. Russell, of course, was right. Lancaster was merely following Winslow's instructions to, for God's sakes, do what you can to save them. Lancaster also received a letter of appreciation from Jefferson Davis and a joint resolution of thanks from the Confederate Congress. Neither Winslow nor Semmes was finished. Their paths, which had crossed twice, now diverged again. Winslow was honored by a vote of thanks from the United States Congress and was promoted to the rank of Commodore. There he is, Commodore, on June, which was made retroactive to June 19th, 1864, the day of the battle. And there is, after the battle, incidentally, they couldn't avoid a camera. There is a shot of the crew, many of the crew, with Thornton up front. Here is still another, and this one has Winslow up front. That is Winslow right there, and that is Thornton. And those are the officers, obviously, of the Kearsarge. Here's another shot of the crew. This was all after the battle. Still another shot. These are the engineers. The engineers aboard the Kearsarge. Here are the Kearsarge's officers at the time of the battle, shortly after it. And here they are in the 1890s, those that were left. Okay. Incredibly, despite risking his life, and despite risking the lives of all his officers and crew, all of whom had agreed to go down with their flags flying rather than surrender to the pirate, despite his magnificent victory and all the accolades he received, Secretary Wells responded to Winslow's official report by criticizing his, quote, gross error and his, quote, error of judgment in paroling, quote, the foreign pirates captured on board the Alabama. He disavowed the parole, which of course meant nothing now because all the parolees had gone to God knows where. Charles Francis Adams was also critical of Winslow's treatment. He was especially angry that he had allowed Semmes and his principal officers to escape. Despite this chastisement, which Winslow fully expected, and which he was quite willing to accept as the price of a final gesture to a friend whom he loved and knew he would never see again, he continued his service in the Navy for the duration of the war and after. That fact alone testifies to the enormous dedication he had to his country. Many others in the same position would have resigned in disgust. On March 2nd, 1870, he was promoted to the rank of Rear Admiral. There he is as Rear Admiral, the highest rank in the United States Navy. After visiting the Hawaiian Islands and living in San Francisco for a year, he returned to Boston in 1873, where he died on September 29th, 1873, at the age of 61. In conformity with his wishes, his wife insisted on a simple service at St. James Episcopal Church, attended only by family, friends, and comrades in arms. His remains were covered with the battle flag of the Kearsarge, and he was buried in Forest Hill Cemetery. Upon learning of his death, Farragut said, "I had sooner have fought that fight than any ever fought upon the ocean." And Semmes said, "He was the Christian gentleman." Semmes suffered no loss of esteem or popularity. It was said to be an unfair fight between an ironclad and a wooden ship. After arriving in Richmond by a very circuitous and tortuous journey, he too was promoted to the rank of Rear Admiral and in the Navy and the rank of Brigadier General in the Land Army. He served on the James River for a while, protecting Richmond, and was present at the surrender of Joe Johnston's army to William Tecumseh Sherman at Greensboro, Durham Station, North Carolina, on April 26, 1865, and May 3rd, 1865. After the war, he opened a law office in Mobile. He was arrested and charged with violating the usages of war, piracy, privatizing, inhumane treatment of prisoners, treason, and so forth. As with so many Confederates, the charges came to nothing, largely because of the extreme animosity between President Johnson and the radical Republicans in the Congress, but also because captain after captain came forth and wrote attesting to the fact that Semmes has always treated them and their prisoners with kindness and decency and dignity in accordance with the rules of war. He did spend 4 months in prison, Semmes did, brooding, and was released when President Johnson, refusing all entreaties to try him, declared the war at an end on April 3rd, 1866. Semmes received a full pardon and his freedom without being subjected to the ordeal of a trial. He was elected judge of the probate court, but Johnson ordered that he not be permitted to assume the duties of that office. Apparently, amnesty had its limits. He became editor of a daily newspaper in Mobile before accepting a professorship at Louisiana Military Institute. He finished his career by practicing law in Mobile. He published 4 books of his career and his exploits: Service Afloat and Ashore During the Mexican War, Cincinnati, 1851; the campaign of General Scott in the Valley of Mexico, 1852, the cruise of Alabama and Sumter, New York, 1864, and Memoirs of Service Afloat During the War Between the States, Baltimore, 1869. And now for the final irony. This man with nerves of steel who strode across the world's oceans, weathering every storm and overcoming every obstacle, the scourge of federal merchantmen, with unheard of cunning and daring and bravery, even to escaping with his life after disasters at Vera Cruz and Gibraltar and Cherbourg, who left 25 Union warships in his wake, died of food poisoning after eating spoiled shrimp at the home of his sister in Point Clear, Alabama, on August 30th, 1877. He was 67 years old. He is buried in Mobile. I should mention that the United States made claims against Great Britain for damage inflicted by the Confederate raiders. They are appropriately called the Alabama claims. The claims are submitted to a tribunal of arbitration consisting of representatives of the United States, Great Britain, Italy, Brazil, and Switzerland. The tribunal ordered that Britain pay $15.5 million to the United States on September 14th, 1872. John Bull. You know who John Bull is? The personification of Great Britain. On his way to the bank to pick up the money, he was seen to smile. On his way to the United States Treasury to deposit the money, he was seen to smile again. And on his way home, he was heard to mutter under his breath, "What a deal." Great Britain had regained her position as the world's #1 maritime power, a victory that would last 80 years. And she did it without firing a shot. A word on the fate of the ships. Kearsarge served her country mostly in the Pacific. There she is in New York Harbor about 1890, a grand old lady. On September 2nd, 1894, she was wrecked on Roncador Reef off the coast of Nicaragua and abandoned after all attempts to save her failed. Thus ended the career of one of the most famous ships in American naval history. Excuse me, there is a monument to her in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, to the ship. Built in 1861, she was only 33 years old when she died. Alabama lay on the bottom of the English Channel for 120 years. In November of 1984, she was discovered by French divers. She is 7 miles off the coast, and she has been explored by French and American divers. Many artifacts have been recovered. They are on display at a museum in Mobile. Management of the wreck is shared by the United States Historical Center, Washington, D.C., and the French Ministry of Culture. Thank you very much for your time.